Hey guys, today we are planting bearded iris. Now bearded iris are one of my favorite flowers, not just because they are so beautiful, but because they are so carefree. Literally, there's almost nothing you have to do to get these guys to make an incredible show. I actually have, and just to keep them alive is definitely a no-brainer. 2 years ago, out in the front yard, I dug up a bunch of bearded iris that I had in a clump and divided them, and I put them in a trash can lid with some drainage holes just until I had the opportunity to find a place for them. Well, it's been 2 years and I still didn't have a place for them. So they've been sitting in a corner, half a day of sunshine, virtually no water, maybe twice a month when I've remembered, and they haven't grown, they haven't bloomed, but they're there and they're alive, kind of in a suspended animation. So just keeping them alive is no problem, and getting them to bloom and grow isn't that much bigger of a deal. Now there's a couple of different times where you can plant them. I am planting Bareroot, which means they look like this. You can see some green and there's some roots, but they're very dry, and you might see, a couple of eyes on the side where they're pushing out new shoots. The best time to plant these is about 2 months before you get really cold weather. And so it might be a little bit late for some of you who have cold winters. For those of you who have mild winters like me, now is the time to get the Bareroot in the ground. Anywhere though that you live, you can plant bearded iris in pots. If you're buying them in a pot, in a container from a nursery, you can plant them at any time of year, as long as the ground's not frozen solid. But planting them Bareroot, you do want a couple of months for them to get some good root growth to sustain them through the winter. And then come spring, they'll start to grow, and these bloom in the summertime. Now there's only 2 things that bearded iris need, and that is good hot sun and really good drainage. Now you can see from sitting in my front yard with no water, they take well to little water, so they're drought tolerant. Now eventually these are going to be in our edible landscaping bed out front, but right now that still has tomatoes and a bunch of other things that are just kind of petering out, and I'm going to be redoing that area for the edible landscape. So these can't go in the ground just yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant them in containers right now so that they can get a good root run throughout the winter, and then in spring I'll be able to plant these into the edible landscape. Now these are not edible, however they do have a low growing spiky sword type plant, and then they put their blooms up on 2 to 3 foot stems. So planted in the edible landscape, these are going to show a lot of color in the summertime. Maybe when there's not a lot of flowers in your edible landscape, this is really going to dress up the space. So not everything in your edible landscape has to be edible. My rule is going to be 80% edible, and then there is going to be the occasional thing thrown in for color. So when you are planting, whether you're planting in containers, and they will grow in containers, I've never done that, and so I don't know how well they grow in containers. They do multiply every year, and they don't like to be cramped. So if you grow them in containers, it probably needs to be a big one, and you're going to need to probably repot it every couple of years and divide it. So I've got 2 different kinds here that I'm planting, or 2 different varieties, and I recommend, if at all possible, that you get multiples of the same iris to plant, so you get a little bit bigger show right off the bat. If you plant one here, one there of different kinds, you don't get quite the pop as when you have a group of them. And so I bought 3 of each type, so stick with odd numbers, 3, 5, 7. The only problem is with one of these varieties, I paid for 2 or 3, and I only made it home with 2. I don't know how that happened. It was my fault though. I know I had 3 in the bag, and the bag was ripped, so it must have fallen out on the way to the car. Anyway, the 2 varieties that I have here, and then I have one or 2 more coming mail order. They're not here yet. So I've got Starting Fresh, which is a purple and white bearded iris, and then I've got Eggnog, which is yellow with a little bit of white thrown in. So when you are actually planting the iris, there's a couple things you need to know about the way this will grow. You see that one end is the rhizome and one end has the growth. The growth is only going to come out at the one end of the rhizome. You can see there's a couple of more new sprouts here and they're growing this exact same way. That's also the way the blooms are going to grow. So when you're planting them, know which way to face them. Another thing to know about bearded iris and the rhizome itself is that the rhizome is not the root. These down here are the roots. This is the rhizome. The rhizome stores nutrients, stores water. It does not collect nutrients and water from the ground. That's what the roots do. And so the rhizome likes to be baked in the hot sun. So if possible, you want to face the rhizome toward the sun, and you want to have the very top of it out of the soil so you can see it visually, kind of like a whale just breaching the surface of the ocean. That's what you want that to look like. All the roots need to be down under the ground. I'm going to plant the three starting fresh iris in this pot here. And I'm just going to remove a little bit of the dead just to get them out of the way of the new growth. And I'm going to spread the roots out a little bit, even though they're a little hard to do. You want to just get them a little bit more spread out and not so clumped up in a ball. Okay, so you also want to know that iris grow out. So if you plant them in the center, they're eventually going to grow out and leave nothing in the center. It's all going to be like old rhizomes that are kind of dead. So I'm going to face all of these toward the outside of the pot. In the ground, you're going to want to plant them about a foot apart. Because I'm planting them in a pot and then they will go in the ground, I'm not so worried about that. Once spring gets here, they'll have a root system, and then when I plant them in the ground, they'll be about a foot apart. Right here, they're going to be a little closer, and that's okay. So you want to make sure that you have the roots under the ground, and kind of spread them out with your fingers under there if you can. And pack that soil around it. And just dust off the very top, just to kind of keep it out there. Now, if you're planting these in the ground and you have clay soil, you're going to want to add a lot of sand or grit or perlite or something porous to that soil to get it to drain well. If you have too much clay, you might have to use raised beds. If you have sandy soil, they're going to love it. Okay, so as you can see, I've got them all planted. You can see the rhizome on each one. You cannot see any of the roots though. They're underground to be able to pull in the water to store in the rhizome. And the rhizome is out to the sun to bake in that hot sun and to really propel the growth and flowering of your bearded iris. Make sure I put the label in here so I remember what it is. Now, if you have bearded iris growing in the ground and you are dividing them, a lot of times their leaves could be maybe a foot, 18 inches tall. If you can see, these are very wobbly. Until their roots get established, wind can actually blow on the leaves and pull them out of the ground. So you want to cut them off about like this, about 4 to 6 inches, so that the wind won't rip your plants out of the ground. Water these really well, and you'll see growth starting within just a few weeks. All right, so for eggnog, I've got a bit of a smaller pot because I only have 2, not 3. And you might find that there aren't any green left here. If you're at the nursery and you're looking for rhizomes and they're all like that, make sure they at least have a green spot, you know, coming out down here. This doesn't need to be green as long as there's something here that's green that's going to grow out and take the place of this one. But preferably, if they can all be green, great, but these were the last few that they had of this variety, and I really liked this variety. So if you're in Southern California, one of the southern states, or in any warm, mild winter climate, now is a good time to put these in. If not, Don't worry, because when it's time to put these out in spring and these are growing, you're going to find ones at your garden center that look exactly the same way. They're going to be growing in a pot already, and we will plant them in the ground together. If you guys grow bearded iris and you have some tips you'd like to share about planting them bare root, let us know in the comments below. If you learned something, please give the video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time.